Hello, my name is Suzanne Johnson. I'm a therapist in Clinton Township, Michigan. I've been a therapist since 1986 and a social worker since 1980. And I've been using EMDR frequently since 2017. In this video, I want to share with you some experiences and quotes of clients of mine who have given me permission to do so. I've changed some of the facts about the clients so that it'd be harder to recognize them. And these are some of the highlights of their sessions. So I don't want you to think you can come in that with one or two sessions, you have insights like this, although you might if you do EMDR. It depends on a lot of things, how much trauma there is, how early it was, how much disassociation. But I find that using methods like this always quickens the progress of recovery. So the first example is a woman in her 20s. She had test anxiety. And when I asked her how anxious she was about a test she had to take in the future, she rated it a 7 out of 10, 10 being the highest. By the end of the session, her test anxiety was a 0 out of 10. And she stated with wonder, quote, "It's like your mind and your soul is connected." The second example is about a woman that had been in war for years. And because of the malnutrition and deprivation related to being war, sometimes they went for weeks without food. Her baby died at birth or close after birth. And she felt a very deep guilt about this. And many nights, maybe all nights, for over 35 years, she couldn't sleep. And people told her it wasn't her fault, but she still felt that it was. After one session of EMDR, she had no more guilt. And she told me at the next session that she was able to sleep well through the night for the first time in many years. The third example is a young man in his 20s. At first, he was surprised that he could even feel anger because, as he said, normally I don't even feel my feelings. Then as he processed a particular memory using EMDR, he said, quote, "The anger is dissipating. It is flowing through me instead of just saying inside of me," end of quote. Later in the session, quote, he said, "It felt like I was more free. I was less shackled by the whole event. I was trying to feel the anger, but I couldn't. It feels like I don't have to care about it. It's really weird." The fourth example is a woman in her 70s. She was feeling really depressed that day. And at the beginning of the session, when I asked her to focus on a memory that made her feel this depression, she reflected, "I don't know who I am without sadness and loneliness." She processed the grief of this particular memory. And by the end of the session, she said, quote, "It is so joyful to learn. I feel grateful for all the people in my life," end of quote. Fifth example, a successful, intelligent, good-looking man in his 30s who experienced tremendous childhood trauma, including being sexually assaulted many times as a young boy. He said he never cried during the sexual abuse and never told anyone about it. As he processed one of the traumatic memories he had using EMDR, he realized that the uneasy feeling he was having during the memory was, quote, "an uneasy feeling I have had since then that I have had often," unquote. Later in the session, he said, quote, "How wrong I am that emotions are weaknesses or to be controlled," end of quote. And also, quote, "I have been walking around in a haze," end of quote. And my favorite one at the end of the session, he said, quote, "The memory feels more real. I feel more real," end of quote. The next example is a woman who had a son in his late teens who had started to use illegal drugs, and she was terrified that he was going to die soon, which was out of proportion for the situation. So I asked her to float back to a time in her life that she felt like this. And she thought about a time where someone she had been close to 10 years before had died, but she thought she was over the death. She had grieved it to a certain extent, but she realized it was connected to her fear that her son was going to die soon. So we worked on that memory using EMDR, and she realized that was why she felt so scared that her son was going to die. And she said, quote, "It helped so much with that situation to make that connection," end of quote. Her fear of her son dying went away. The seventh example is a man in his 40s. He was having much panic, trouble breathing, feeling dizzy, and very tired. And he didn't know why he was having panic. So again, I asked him to float back to a time earlier in his life where he felt panic. And he thought of a time where, as a young adult, he let people convince him to do things he didn't want to do sexually, and which led him to shut down emotionally, totally. He remembered one time when this happened and was surprised that the memory came up because he thought he had totally processed it. After he processed the memory using EMDR, he said, quote, "Maybe I shouldn't be mad at myself in those situations. I did the best I could, and I don't know why I feel so much peace," end of quote. Eighth example is a young Asian woman, first-generation immigrant, emotionally neglected by her single-parent mom who had tremendous and unfair expectations of her as she was growing up. As we focused on her feelings using EMDR, she said, quote, "I take care of everyone else before I take care of myself," end of quote. By the end of the session, she said regarding these memories, quote, "I'm not bothered by it. I'm a lot more relaxed. I am calm," end of quote. Another session with this client started with the client asking, "What's wrong with me?" later using EMDR. And later in the session, "What's wrong with my mom?" And then later in the session, what had gone wrong in her mom's life to treat her so poorly. The ninth example is showing how EMDR can strengthen good feelings and experiences as well as clearing out bad ones. I was working with a client who had chronic fatigue syndrome for quite a while. She was in tremendous pain from fibromyalgia, and she rated her pain a 10 out of 10, 10 being the worst. I asked her to remember a time that she used to do a form of exercise called kickboxing. And as we used the EMDR bilateral movement, she remembered, she said, "I can picture it more vividly. Quote, I feel like I'm really doing it. I remember the same feeling when I exercise. I felt a sense of accomplishment," end of quote. She remembered that the video would give her messages such as, quote, "Don't tell yourself you can't. You're stronger than you know. You can do it, end of quote. By the end of the session, her pain level had gone down by 30%, and her energy level went from feeling really weak to having some energy. The 10th example is a woman in her early 40s, and she processes trauma from her child in young adult years. When I do EMDR with her, it's as if this younger or a wiser part of herself comes through to her and gives messages and awarenesses. And here's some of the things that that part has said. Quote, "I realize I have been thin-skinned due to my child feelings. I felt I had no protection from others. Tolerance to the unknown in the future is the price to pay to find new and beautiful things," end of quote. Quote, "Squandered gifts can take an inertia of its own. What a waste," end of quote. Quote, "I feel a major knot has been untied in my mind. It, the memory, doesn't hurt the same in the context of my adult vision," end of quote. Quote, "I took out a lot of pain, my pain out on other people, which was not my intention. I have guilt and shame about that. It was a survival mechanism," end of quote. Quote, "It feels like what I'm doing is inner alchemy, turning my fears into engagement and connection," end of quote. Quote, "I feel a sense of options and encouragement that I was lacking before the session. I am grateful for the peace I am finding," end of quote. So that's the end of my examples. I hope that they've given you a better idea of how EMDR can help you. If you want to work with me, you can find my website in a link below. Have a good day. Bye-bye.